Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Feeding People podcast. I'm so happy to be with you today and cannot even believe who my guest is today. This is so exciting. Today we have Elsie DuBray, one of the stars of my very favorite documentary called Gather. I love this film so much, and I am just so thrilled to be here with Elsie talking about the film and all things food equity. So welcome, Elsie.
Thank you. I'll just go ahead and introduce myself in my language, which is kind of custom for us to do. Hamadakyapi, Chantewa nape Chiusapiksto, Machia Ilemi Imachiapi, Nawashita Yamichazikit Elsie DuBray, Oóhenuŋpa Lakxóta na Nueta na Hidatsa Hidatsa, na Oóhenuŋpa Lakxóta Yanke Vimetnavro. Hello, relatives. I greet you all with a good heart. My name is Machia Ilemi, and my English name is Elsie DuBray. I am Tukamlo Lakota, Mandan, and Hidatsa, and I come from the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. And then I guess a little more of an intro is I am no longer 17 as I was in the film.
Yes.
I am now about to turn 24, and I'm a graduate student at Stanford University. So
amazing.
A lot to catch up on. Yeah.
So much to catch up on. Yes, we're going to do it all today. Thank you for that beautiful intro. So Gather is a beautiful documentary film following Native people and how they're improving access to food. And it's just gorgeous. You're one of the 5 who are working hard in this film to have better access towards food. And so let's just start from the very beginning. What was food like for you growing up?
As is shown in the film, I come from a buffalo ranch on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. And that is where I've lived my whole life. And that is what my family's been doing my whole life. And so I had the very, very privileged experience of having access to this incredible high quality grass-fed buffalo meat, access to traditional foods in a way that is very not common for most Native folks. And something that I always knew was a blessing, but definitely took for granted still, even still. So food was primarily that relationship to the buffalo and is super formative to my understanding of what it means to eat well. We grew a garden a lot of the time in the summers. I grew up picking berries, wild berries down by the house, digging tivsila, which are our wild prairie turnips. And it was just something that was so normal because it was something my dad grew up doing and something that he was like, this is what you do. It's every year that I get older, it's the more I realize more and more how lucky I was and how even though that seems so normal for me and it should be so normal, but that really isn't the norm, even where I'm from. It's not normal in the way that it should and could be. And that's really sad to me and something that I'm sure we'll unpack a little bit in the following minutes.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. That's so beautiful. What a beautiful life and beautiful childhood that you were raised within such a beautiful community. So you were studying buffalo, specifically lipid structure, right? Within buffalo. And you were 16, 17, and you took your research to the World Science Fair where you placed 3rd and 4th, right? in the World Science Fair 2 years in a row. And it was there that you caught the attention of the filmmakers behind this beautiful film called Gather. And they saw what you were doing and invited you into the film. So just tell me about that, what it was like being 16, 17, doing that research, and then getting connected to this film.
Yeah, being a part of Gather Film has been probably one of the coolest experiences of my life and something that I'll be grateful for the rest of time. It's definitely something that I was certainly excited about as a high schooler to get an email from a film producer and or from a director. And I mean, I didn't know who he was at the time, but I knew the film that he had directed, and I was like, oh, he seems like he's kind of a big deal. And then I started looking people up, and I was like, wow, this is quite the crew. This is kind of the real deal. But I was in such a science fair mode. Frankly, I was not in the best of mental health states during my science fair time. I was definitely too rigid, too focused on the school aspect of things. I was desperate to get into Stanford, kind of prioritizing the wrong things. But nonetheless, I'm really grateful I was able to do research that had an impact and had such real significance to me, even if I did get a little carried away with the science fair intensity.
Yeah, of course. And so they approached you about being in the film and talking about the importance of buffalo and what it means specifically for your community. Tell us more about that. Like, tell us about buffalo and the importance of this beautiful animal.
Do you have a week?
Yes, please. Please.
I mean, I'll be talking my whole life about the importance of buffalo, but I think the easiest way to convey kind of the gravity of the significance is to just state that buffalo are in our creation story as Lakota people. And so in our creation story, there are different iterations, but we understand ourselves to be kin. We understand ourselves to be one and the same. And there was sacrifices that were made and that inform how we understand a reciprocal relationship to the buffalo that is grounded in generosity and gratitude, and our very existence. And so we know it to be true as Lakota people that we would not exist without the buffalo. We cannot continue to exist as a people without the buffalo because they inform who we are as a people. And so then you think about, in grim recognition of that truth, the federal government set out on a genocidal campaign to try to eradicate the buffalo. And that was very intentional. And it has had a significant impact on our communities and other buffalo people's communities. Yeah, I mean, you think of it, it's like a standard tactic of war to attack a people's food system. And that's for a reason. And I mean, there's like the quote, like, you are what you eat kind of type of thing. And that's like really true for Lakota people, as we understand ourselves to be one and the same. We know that what happens to the buffalo happens to us. What happens to us happens to the buffalo. And so when you think about a relationship that equates you to something that's not your very own self, or that is an extension of your very own self, like that's deep. That is a deep relationship. That is a connection that goes beyond the physical, that goes beyond the mental, that there's a spiritual component, and there is a wholeness to our relationship to the buffalo that transcends so much of what I can even describe in a few words or in a sentence or in English. Like, our relationship to the buffalo and their importance cannot be contained. It cannot be described. It is transcendent and radical and like astronomically huge, and it's written in the stars, and it's something I can't articulate.
Thank you for that. That's so beautiful. And I imagine, like, when you are studying the buffalo, when you're caring for the buffalo, like, it seems like such a divine, like, spiritual connection. I loved what you said about what's good for them is good for you. And it's just so beautiful. Is that how you feel when you're like with them, caring for them, studying them? Like, it's just this like magical divine connection of care and love, and yeah.
I get really emotional, especially in like more recent years when I like have grown up a little bit, and I've been able to like really think about how much this means to me and how lucky this is. And after experiencing some like really difficult things in my life, and really seeing the ways in which the buffalo have held me in those times of grief and despair, and have taught me how to continue and how to live. And the ways I've really realized that like my personality and my morals and my values and my understanding of myself are so deeply informed by them, the more and more I feel grateful and connected and lucky to be around them. And I've always said, even when I was a kid, like being around them, like you just feel something, like they feel there's such a powerful feeling, or like when they look right at you, it's like you just like tingle a little bit. And
oh my gosh,
maybe that's fear. Like maybe some of that's healthy fear. in some ways. But I think the fear is not so much that I'm scared they're going to charge me. It's that I always told my dad, I feel like they can see right through me. Like I feel like they look at me and there's no filter, there's no walls put up. Like they're not going to buy into any mask I'm putting on. Like they see me for who I am. And there's such a vulnerability in that, right? But there's also there's a safety in that too, because I feel like they see and they know me. And I don't know, this is getting kind of like meta and stuff, but being around them and doing work with them really truly makes me feel like I'm doing myself justice. Like I'm living up to what I'm meant to do, who I'm meant to be, what I'm meant to contribute, and who I really am. And I'm so lucky. Like I feel they really make me feel so grateful and so lucky. And it really is such a powerful presence to be around.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't love this more. It's just so amazing. Like just to hear, your obvious love for them and connection to them is so beautiful. And thank you for sharing that with us all. And I have no doubt, like just hearing your words is expanding all of our hearts and minds as we're listening. So thank you for that. So, okay, you were 17 in the film. You're 24 now. You're at Stanford. Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. Tell us about Tell me what you're studying at Stanford and what you hope to do.
Yeah, so when I went in and like with the film, I thought I was going to be some biochemistry major. I was going to keep up the biochemical research in a lab. That is not what happened. I quickly realized I had mentioned earlier that like I was not in a great mental health space towards the end of high school, my junior and senior year, and especially my senior year. And then going, especially into my freshman year of college, I was struggling really heavily with eating disorder, which when you think about kind of my involvement in traditional foods and nutrition and nourishment is really ironic. But I fully believe it's my relationship to the buffalo and my understanding of food sovereignty and those principles in my work in the kind of the social dimension of what food sovereignty looks like and food systems work that really pulled me out of that and allowed me to heal.
Wow.
And so there's a lot, there's a lot there. But so it was the kind of hyperfixation on this scientific aspect, this Western scientific aspect, and this intense biochemistry. Like that's an interest of mine. It's an intellectual interest. I nerd out about it. I love hearing about the bonds and seeing like what's happening on a molecular level in the bloodstream and metabolism. But focusing on that was breaking me, and it was removing me from this relationship to the buffalo. That is what I at least now truly understand to have what holds the real healing power, and what holds the real meaning. Like this other stuff is kind of very secondary to me now, and it's interesting and it's important, but it's not where I belong. And so I became a human biology major at Stanford, which is kind of this interdisciplinary major that allows you to design your own concentration, which mine was the holistic health and well-being of Indigenous communities. And so I kind of like crafted this like native public health dimension of my degree. And I took some of the biochem type stuff. I took the biology, I took the chemistry, I took the nutrition, I took the physiology. But I also took life medical anthropology and native studies classes and thinking about the like real social aspect of this, and then focusing a lot of my work like with First Nations. And when the film came out, we've done a lot of panels and speaking engagements, and it's been a lot of talking to people, and it's been a lot of engagement with people in different sectors of our food system and discussing like, why does this mean something? Everybody knows that you don't want high cholesterol, and everybody knows that high blood, like sugars in your blood is not good for you. But telling people not to drink pop is not the answer to solving a diabetes crisis in our community. And these shame-based narratives that are so common in standard kind of status quo public health spaces. And I'm really not interested in that. And so I started to like really see this gap in the public health sphere in incorporating our values as Native peoples and our understandings of food system and understandings and conceptions of what it means to be healthy and well, and what it means to be fed and to be nourished. And this relationship to food that goes so much beyond macronutrients and the My Plate from USDA or whatever. And so now I'm a master's student in community health and prevention research, which is Stanford's kind of version at the med school of public health, because they don't have a school of public health, which is interesting. But so it's kind of like a little bit more applied, supposedly a little more of like an applied public health degree with a real community focus, which is the only type of public health I'm interested in, is something that's actually relevant to community. So that's what I'm currently working on.
Amazing. Congratulations on all of that incredible work and success. So when you think about, I'm asking all my guests this season, like their perspective on what's gone wrong in the food system. And I know it's like the most giant question ever, but I love hearing everyone's perspective. So Elsie, for you, like what is like one thing you would like boil it down to, recognizing there are a million things wrong with our food system? Like for you, what is the thing that like infuriates you the most that is not right in our food system currently?
I think for me, I'd be remiss if I didn't like talk about or criticize the cattle industry, which is very hot topic, very contentious, gets me into some sticky situations sometimes. In my own community, which is where it gets like the toughest. But when you think about just how powerful the cattle industry is, like in Washington and in our government, with lobbying power, and how much policy is directly informed by the cattle industry when you wouldn't even think they have anything to do with it. Like that's like on a big picture level and how it affects everybody. But when you're talking to somebody whose entire existence depends on the buffalo, and you think about the way that the cattle industry has so violently disrupted that relationship intentionally, and in so many ways with such deep hooks, that's my biggest issue. And I think, like you can get into the whole history of it. Like we know that cattle are not great for the environment. Like if you want to talk about methane and environmental science, we know there's all sorts of nutrition research out there about like this grain-fed beef. And I saw the fat in the vials. I distilled it myself. Like that was disgusting. I trust what comes out. I understand why a lot of the kind of high up nutritionists in California are so anti-red meat, even though I'm very pro certain ethical red meat consumption. And so there are all of those facets, but I have been talking a lot within my family and like within my own mind about how to kind of like approach this relationship to the cattle industry, and like the cattle industry as one of the biggest and longest lasting institutions of the United States. And how that's not going to go away overnight. But how that's really one of the biggest things that has the most potential to have real transformative power. And I think about the ways in which our own community really needs to have conversations about our continued buy-in and involvement in these systems. And something that really stuck with me is I was interviewing my dad once, and he talked about the self-determination era. When you're talking about like federal Indian policy, the self-determination era is like this whole set of policies that is like seen as really this like win for Native rights and justice for Native folks in the United States from a policy level. And my dad, and some may think it's cynical, but I think it's really honest and really powerful perspective, talks about, he said, well, self-determination to me is that the United States federal government finally felt like their assimilative policies and things had gone far enough that us as Native folks were going to determine to do these things to ourselves.
Wow.
And when you think about Native organizations that are buying into or replicating structures of the federal government, these Western and really colonially violent institutions, and then we're making our own Native versions of it and claiming that that's sovereignty. And buying into this notion of sovereignty as is defined by the settler colonial state instead of our own definitions of what it means to be sovereign and in our own language and cultures and identities. And then you think about how that relates then to buying into being a native producer in ag and having this native cattle ranch. And just thinking about how that sounds great on paper from like that's checking the boxes for what the White House would say food sovereignty is. But what is that doing in community as far as relating you back to your creation story? Cattle are not in our creation story. It's one of my dad's favorite stories to tell. Is I was at a conference once and I was talking about buffalo. I had this whole keynote presentation talking about buffalo and everything that they mean. And somebody in the crowd had a question saying like, well, don't you think we could do the same thing with cattle if we just like raise them better? Or like more ethically, grass fed and gave them enough land. And I mean, like, I fear getting asked about cattle all the time because, I mean, I have family who's cattle ranchers. My dad was a cattle rancher before he, like, raised buffalo. Like, I understand what that means to people. And I understand that people aren't in it trying to be, like, colonially violent most of the time, especially in our own communities. And I also understand that that was a mechanism of survival for our people and that was forced upon us. And there is very explicit, like, history of how cattle came into our communities and the ways in which our people tried to make that a relationship that could work and had to survive. And I understand that. I am empathetic and compassionate towards that. But I also understand that we can't keep doing what we're doing and that doesn't mean that we're not at a place now where we can try to change that and move beyond that. But in that conference, I just said, like, well, buffalo are in our creation story, not cattle. So it's never going to be the same. And my dad was like, that was perfect. Like, that's great. Like, nobody, because nobody can question that. Like, nobody can challenge that. And I think, like, I'm not trying to win. It's not some gotcha moment type of thing. It's just the reality. Buffalo are in our creation story. Cattle aren't. So stop trying to make it something that it's not, you know? Right. Anyway.
Elsie, wow. I mean, you got the goosebumps on my arm right here. That was unbelievable. Thank you for that. That like unique perspective on current food system and the cattle industry that only you could bring. Thank you for that. When you think this is going to be a real hard turn, when you think about food sovereignty and your vision for like what could be, knowing hopefully it's possible, but also the reason why you're doing the hard work you're doing and speaking the way and studying the way you're studying. Like, ultimately, what is your dream of food sovereignty? What does that look like in your mind and your heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about that from kind of like a theoretical standpoint and just like, I guess, kind of like native academic sphere of what it looks like to quote, I guess, Leanne Simpson, like indigenous resurgence. And then like Toni Morrison's like Black feminist praxis and thinking about like building an otherwise world is like what I talk about and think about that a lot. And food sovereignty as this radical reconceptualization of Lakota public health and a mechanism towards it and building this Lakota futurism that is part of an otherwise world, a just otherwise world, a healthful otherwise world. I think about, okay, so what does that look like then? And I think you could have all sorts of like romanticized images in your head about it that would make me super happy. But I think something that I think about is, I mean, I've spent my whole life being told and witnessing and being very like keenly aware that my experience and my upbringing with the buffalo is one that is insanely unique. And people saying that like, you and your brother are like the only Lakota kids since the 1800s who have spent their whole lives around buffalo.
Wow.
And just being like, to my knowledge, that was true. I don't know now, and I don't know if that was fully ever true, but certainly one of very few, if not the only people who've had that experience and who got to grow up on that. And just keenly aware that that was like so special and so unique. And I think that, and even still, it's not enough. And that's not me trying to be sound ungrateful. Like, I think hopefully I've communicated, like, I'm so grateful and feel very privileged and blessed and honored. But like that the relationship isn't whole. There's having a family herd and being able to learn these things from my dad and do these things in my home with my family is beautiful and great, but it's not what it means to be a Lakota person connected to buffalo. Like, that's inherently a community and tribally specific understanding. And there's an individual relationship component, but more so there's a communal component. There's a tribal component to that. And that's something that I have missed my whole life and have not seen. And that is something that I think, like, and this seems like I'm just kind of throwing it out of nowhere. So there's like content warning here. But my younger brother passed away to suicide in 2020, which was just probably 6-7 months after Gather was released. And I talk so much about like how, oh, well, if only other youth had access to like what we've had access to, or to this relationship to buffalo, their heart, they could be more like us. That's like the narrative that's been imposed. It's like, oh, if other kids had your guys' experience and were more like you, they wouldn't experience the hardships that they do. And yet my little brother I don't want to say fell victim, because he's not a victim. I mean, he's a victim of colonial violence, but my brother was not able to escape the statistics of my reservation community, despite it all. And that means something. That shows something. And there's a lot at play. It's not just a insufficient relationship to the buffalo that is the problem. Like, there's a lot of colonial context there that informs things. But all that being said, I think about and I swear this is getting to your question, like this is answering your question. People ask me like, oh, well, what do you want to do? What are you going to do when you graduate? Like, your job and stuff. I'm like, well, I don't think what I want to do has a job description, at least yet. Right. And my dad's like, well, you can make one. And I'm thinking about like, what does that look like? If I were to create a job title for something that was meaningful and that was working towards what the world I want to try to like contribute to and that I'm trying to build, what would that title look like? What would that job look like? And I think about having a wellness sector, a wellness office as part of our tribe's buffalo program. And I have a lot of qualms with my tribe's buffalo program, which we can get into another time, or people can ask me about. But I do understand that it needs to be our tribe's buffalo program, not just my family's herd, that is doing this work and that is fully integrated into the community, and that the community feels a part of and is actively participant in. And so I think when I think of what food sovereignty can look like in an ideal world, it's having, for my community, it's having this tribally owned buffalo program that, or at least in the more immediate future, something that I see as possible in my lifetime, very possible, very tangible, and something that I'm going to commit myself to trying to make a reality, is a buffalo program that is operating in a way that involves our community, and where I'm seeing more and more kids and generations of youth who are growing up knowing buffalo their whole life, having access where buffalo are normal. Like, and I mean, this isn't an ideal, like my
That's
ideal
beautiful.
looks different, but this is something that I see is very possible, but very meaningful, and like think is very powerful. Like, to have a generation of Lakota people where buffalo are normal part of our lives, and where buffalo are seen on a regular basis and part of everyday conversation, that means something. That is powerful, that is radical, and that is something that goes against the intentions of the 1800s and the near eradication of the buffalo. And that's something that's starting to happen. Over my spring break, we butchered a buffalo, and it was wild. And it was a very hot girl spring break. I joked about that. I had pictures of me with like a buffalo heart on my Instagram story, and I was like, hot girl spring break. Because it was very different than a lot of my peers' spring break.
I would say, yes.
It was the first time that I had been part of a buffalo butchering where there was a baby present, and there was a baby who was putting his hand on the buffalo, and he was running around, and he wasn't noticing really maybe what was happening, but he was a baby at a buffalo butchering. How often does that happen? How many years, how much work and advocacy has had to happen before a baby could just be able to run amok at a buffalo butchering? And who's going to be able to go to more of those, and who I feel confident is going to have spent his entire life knowing what it means to be around buffalo and to learn about buffalo and to be able to take that relationship for granted as a kid.
Oh my gosh, Elsie, wow.
And that was so beautiful and powerful to me, because I'm like, I mean, I know I'm young. I'm only 23. It's not like I'm some elder looking down at the younger generations type of thing, but it's thinking about what it means to be like a good ancestor in the future and stuff. That's so special for me to be able to see. And I'm only 23, and I'm starting to be able to see like how meaningful it must have been for my dad to have passed on, he's passed on to us, and what it's going to mean to me to someday pass these things on to my children, and what it's going to mean to me to be an elder in my community, seeing these things happening, seeing these relationships unfold and develop in ways that seemed so distant when I was young, but that I've never felt we're that distant. Like, people, I think, have always challenged like my dad's views, which have very heavily influenced my views, and it's no secret, as being like very radical and like, oh, it's like out of touch and impossible and things. But a lot of what my work is setting out to do is making people realize that the radical is very tangible.
The radical is very tangible. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a whole thesis about it.
That's so beautiful.
And I believe it wholeheartedly. I mean, I don't think that this idea of buffalo restoration is something that's so far out there and so like radical left wing, never going to happen type of thing. Like, I am keenly aware of the obstacles and the institutional barriers that are in place that make these things very difficult. But I also am so keenly aware of, given my unique opportunities growing up, of that very real transformative power that transcends any and all of that. And that this can happen, this needs to happen urgently, for my family, for my community, for my own being, like for the buffalo themselves. And I know it in my heart to be true that this is a good thing. And this is something that can happen. And there are more people who are realizing that. And I think that that's something that makes my dad really happy. It's something that makes me really happy. It's something that I really try to do in my conversations. Like, I'm the TA for an Indigenous food sovereignty class at Stanford that, with the collaboration of First Nations, is being offered for the second time. We offered it last year. And there's now a space at Stanford University for these types of conversations to be happening among the Native students who are like powerfully taking up space at the Stanford institution, as well as allies and accomplices in different spheres of academia who also see this as being real important work that they are willing to buy into. And that's powerful, and that's beautiful, and it's really exciting, and it makes me feel happy to be alive and happy to be a young person, which is hard sometimes in this day and age.
Of course.
But food sovereignty and these ideas and buffalo are what give me hope and make me want to keep going and give me a purpose in this wild world that we live in time. But yeah.
Elsie, the radical is tangible is something I'm going to hold deep in my body and my heart for a long time. Thank you for that. And good gracious, the difference you are already making, you have already made in the world as such a young person, and the difference you're making now. I just cannot wait to see all the good that you continue to put in the world and all that you do as you continue to move on. And you have made a difference, and you will continue to make a difference, and we will all be better for it. So thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for sharing your incredible light and spirit with us today.
Well, Palamayaya, thank you so much for having me and for letting me ramble and for valuing what I have to say. It means a lot to me, so I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you.